Hello, Anima-saurus world, and thank you for joining me again for another industry chat. Today, I'm very lucky to be joined in the studio by J.M. Mooney. Thanks for joining me, J.M.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for having me.
Um, look, I'm really interested in hearing what you've got going because we're going to get to talking about script and early development, which is what you're currently working on at the moment. So I'm looking
Yeah,
forward to
yeah.
getting into that. But before we do, just for the people who have not ran into you before or not come across you, do you want to just give us a quick background of who you are and where you fit into the industry?
Yeah, I've most of my background is live action, so TVC, broadcast TV. I've done a feature length doco, um, yeah, and a lot in the advertising industry. So it's kind of mainly been in like I've done various roles: writer, director, editor, motion graphics, and even camera. I started in the camera department and as a camera operator.
Oh, yeah, that's
Yeah,
that.
bit
That's
of everything.
That's a lot of fun because that's what I do now. Digitally is mostly with camera work, so I kind of dig that heaps. But I know you spent some time down in Sydney and got to work with some pretty major brands and major well-known names. So how? Like I know the one which kind of stands out, which most people would have heard of, would have been the Disney company. So how did it come about that you got to work with Disney?
So yeah, Disney was a few years down the track. Like I started my career up in Queensland. I went to K.A.T E up here. Went down to Sydney because I got into afters, did directing there. I was lucky because when I was in Queensland, a guy named Ricky Marks gave me a start on some TV series. Then I went down to Sydney, and again, I was kind of lucky. I got into a TV series down there, so I built up my broadcast credits that way. Um, and then Disney was a few years down the track. I'd been working as a kind of director, producer, editor for probably 5 or 6 years, and went in for the interview, and they liked what I did. I'd done work on a kids YouTube series, essentially advertising toys, which they liked, and so I kind of got my step in that way. They saw it's something I did for the Mario Mario and Monopoly crossover, and they loved that. And that's pretty much what got me the job. So that, and obviously I'd had enough experience producing and directing as well.
Yep. So what? So while you were there, how long were you actually there at Disney?
I think I was there for about 8 or 9 months as like it was a contract. So I did. I started on a couple of things for their channel. So it was Toytopia, which was the thing I was initially hired for, I think. And then I did a segment on Hanging With, which is the afternoon show. And then we were working with Facebook to try and get a Facebook series going called Disney Details. And I was a director producer for that. And so that was the majority of time I was there and just like finding out what works on social and what doesn't work on social. And it was a bit tricky that finding a balance between, making sure what we were saying was great from the like legal and marketing department, and then also having it be authentic. And we explored a bunch of different kind of options there and tried out the series and kind of played around in that space to see what would really work. And yeah, it's a tricky space. Particularly coming from like a more broadcast background, social is a very different beast to kind of tackle. So
I was just thinking that because social media is very different in like time strains, constraints, and structure. So the way you would approach actually coming up with projects for that, were you given like a fairly free rein for how you approached building stuff for social media?
yeah, like we were willing. What was great with Disney is we were willing to experiment with a whole bunch of stuff. We had stats, but obviously it's quite a bit when you go in to learn about the brand. Like, Disney's such a master at branding, so to really understand the branding of Disney. And the team were fantastic to work with because they were willing to try different things, like which we did. Like even throughout the series, it changed, and we were exploring different options. So it was good to uh, work in an environment that had flexibility like that.
Oh, cool. Excellent. Like you said, you were there for 8 months and then you also ended up working. Where did you end up after that? Or what did you tackle after that?
After Disney, I think after Disney was Foxtel. Before, I think Nickelodeon was before Disney. I can't remember actually. It's all kind of a bit of a blur. Um,
What were you wrapped up in with Nickelodeon?
Nick was great. That was we the first contract I went in with those guys was a series called Slime Cup. So I was editing and doing motion graphics for Slime Cup, and that was so much fun. That's one of my favorite gigs actually because they really support creators and creativity, and they gave us free range a lot, and you don't really experience that a lot in the industry. I find, generally it's pretty tight time constraints and very, you know, particularly in advertising and marketing, it's kind of death by committee. So, but that wasn't the case at Nickelodeon. It was very, they kind of let us really play and really kind of you know enjoy the process and come up with and I came up with some of the best, definitely the best animation work I did was at Nickelodeon. And then I went on to there was a couple of like year end wrap things and Kids Choice Sports Awards, which I did the title graphics for with that, and
Was
that was
that
a heap of fun too.
Were you working with a very big team there, Nick, or
No,
yeah?
they've got a big team, but particularly like those two productions. So the core production team for well the core post production team for Slime Cup was like there was like 4 or 5 of us, um, and then Kids Choice Awards was a small team. There was like 3 of us. So
Oh, okay, yeah. It's because it's interesting when you do hear big names. Like a lot of people, when they think about big names like that, they go, "Well, there must be a lot of people that actually are involved in it." But like you said, they do so much diverse material as well. It's not just their
yeah,
long form cartoons and things. So there are
yeah,
there's quite a lot of little openings for people to be able to get in, not on the main stuff
yeah,
as well.
definitely. I mean, yeah, that both. I mean, Disney had like a massive office, but that's also all of the marketing for Pixar, Marvel, Star Wars, and Disney in Australia, Asia Pacific region. So there's so many different roles and different ways people can be involved. Yeah, so the production side of things, yeah, it's not gigantic by any means, but there's a lot of people, there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of people in legal, a lot of people in marketing, social, management, that type of thing. So yeah.
Yeah. So while you were down in Sydney, then you got to work with them, but you also have done a lot of like directing roles. What sort of drew you towards kind of directing? Was it something you sort of just stumbled into and just found that you had a knack for, or was it something that you really wanted to get into right from the start?
Yeah, it's definitely something I wanted to get into. I wasn't completely aware of what I wanted to do, and I was a mature age student going to uni. And once I got into a film set, like that was, it just clicked. I was like, this is where I want to be.
Ah.
Um, I thought at that point I was going to be a novelist. And until I got onto a film set, and I'm like, no, this is me. I'm sold. Like, I just loved everything about it. And I loved every part of the process as well. There's been certain things I've had to stop myself from really pursuing. Like, I get excited about a lot of different things, and that can chew up a lot of time.
Yeah.
And like 3D is one of them. I'm like, no, stop it. Like, don't go. There's
Yep.
so many little. I'm like a kid in a candy store. Sometimes I get really excited about all this different stuff, but that's not particularly productive.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, so directing definitely. I did a couple of um, short films at uni, and then I went down to afters for directing. So I did the grade certificate in directing down there, and I love directing. I mean, the biggest thing is being a storyteller.
Yep.
Um, and yeah, I just really enjoy. We did some really interesting things like playing around with uh, there's the two types of directing, particularly in live action. It's different with animation. You've got your kind of Fincher, like architect types that know exactly how he wants it coming from, and then you've got your more Fellini types that, even though Fellini started as a writer, most of his films were on set, like they just were created on set.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
and that's really interesting to kind of balance it. And then you got somebody like Nolan. It's a bit of a balance between the two. So
So you
um,
developed your style. What sort of style do you think you actually take to approach, especially to a live set now?
it's yeah, I just try and find some truth in the subject matter. That's I think, and more, I think people's kind of BS radars are a bit sharper. So I think finding some truth, something kind of rocks you inside, like that's the ideal for me. I mean, I've just done fun things. We did a short film for Trot Fest, and that was just a comedy, and that was just a bunch of fun. So uh, yeah, that was just what it was. And but yeah, ideally, I like to try and get in and try and layer the content. So it might be definitely, I think entertainment's our job. Like
Mm.
that's what we're here to do. But then if you can layer that with something that makes people think or feel something, that's what, as a director, I'm particularly interested in.
Yep. Yeah, because that kind of then leads us into what I really wanted to kind of talk with you a lot about now is
Yeah.
now you're getting into writing a series, which is Monkey and Me. So
Yeah.
yeah, so with your novelistic background, like you said, you were going to be a novelist, which is really cool. So that means you've spent a lot of time learning and crafting your storytelling over this period. So how are you then like? Well, first off, why are you thinking about actually writing a series?
Yeah. I think a couple of years ago, yeah, it might have been a year or two ago, I, you know, I'd been in the industry for about 10 years and I just went, what do I actually want to do? Like, why do I care about being a storyteller? I was working in animation a bit and it was starting to seep my soul out a little bit. So I was getting kind of tired of that. And I just thought like, I was watching a lot of the masterclass and things like that and doing a bit of soul searching, meditation, that type of thing. And it's like, what can what's the thing that I'm uniquely kind of created to make, like, and started doing that questioning. And I'm like, oh, and I've always had like 10 films that I've wanted to make and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, well, what's the one idea I can actually go, no, this is the only thing I'll do for a decade. Um, Not that that's how it would play out, but just that level of commitment was something I had to search for because I think as most creators, I think it's just nice to have all these different projects in the air. Um, so this was the one I was like, no, this is something I'm unique. Like I think I've uniquely developed myself to tell. I've kind of got a bit of a belief, like Carl. Do you know who Carl Jung is?
I don't know the
Um,
name, no, but
he's Swiss psychologist, like genius, and he talked about the unconscious, so having stuff flow through you instead of coming from your ego. That's a really simplified version of that theory, but it's essentially what it is. Um, but yeah, I just looked at like what's the stories I want to tell and what kind of difference do I want to try and make out there. And when it took a while, and it definitely took some gumption to actually just commit to one idea instead of just having a bunch out there.
yeah,
And Monkey and Me was definitely the thing that I could see because I never even considered animation. But this project, I was like, no, this is the story I need to tell.
yeah.
So,
Well, I guess
and
can we? It'd be great to actually just expand on because, a lot of people always kind of, you go out with a bunch of people, all of a sudden, creatives talk, they got millions of ideas, and you can come up
yeah,
and piece together something. So I'd love to hear like how you approached the culling process of actually getting into, like, getting rid of the ones which you didn't think were going to work.
painfully. No.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like, there's the saying killing your babies. It kind of feels like you kill your babies. There's still one other feature that I can't quite leave behind completely, but um, the yeah, it's a good question actually. I think I just did a lot of thinking, like in terms of what I'm doing a lot now is looking at theme and voice. And when I thought about my theme and like the thematics of the storytelling that I particularly like and what my voice is, this kind of crossed over so many of my loves because I grew up in a difficult childhood. My dad was mentally ill. I had some mental illness going, and that I spent years and years kind of unraveling myself. Um, and just got fascinated in the way the mind works. And because I started out with, the idea I was going to try and fix my dad, but that was not going to work. He had frontal lobe syndrome, which is a pretty intense kind of mental illness. And but it did get me fascinated in the mind and how people interact and how clumsy our minds can be. Um, and then I got into this idea of the observer, which is predominantly from like Buddhist or meditation techniques, where you start to kind of sit yourself back from your ego and start to observe your ego doing egoic things. And it actually becomes kind of comical at a certain point. Like you just start to laugh at yourself, which is great because it also takes the significance and the heaviness out of what you're doing.
Yeah.
And you don't like make it mean something about you. You don't get tied up in, I'm a bad person. It's just like, why did I do that? That's madness. And then like, playing around with that idea. And it was really good to get out of, for me, it was really healing to be able to start to observe my internal state and the craziness going on in there and not, sorry, directly relate that like it meant something about me. So,
Yeah.
and it's kind of funny. It's kind of funny some of the things we do as human beings because like our brains weren't built for this age. They weren't at all. And it's hilarious.
Yeah, it's because I find that a very fascinating topic now is to see, kind of put your own projection out onto how things are going to go in the future compared to all the
Yeah.
inputs we have now on a brain that is
Yep.
built for, millennia ago where we used to live in
That's
caves.
right.
So,
Running away from dinosaurs. Now social situations can feel like there's a T-Rex coming for us. And
yeah.
yeah,
So,
it's quite interesting.
yeah, it's an interesting like I've found that especially in this age of where we've all of a sudden been restricted to the household and a lot of people have been
Yeah.
coming into contact with a lot of things they've never had to put up with before. It does
Yep.
bring about a lot more intense internal dialogue,
Yeah, definitely.
which
Yeah, yeah.
which is brings up great stories. I think, like you said, you do
Yeah.
some introspective storytelling. As long as you don't hold on to it and think, "Oh my god, I'm a moron." It's just like stuff that's happened.
Well, that's
You,
the trick, separating the meaning from the actual thing. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, with the themes that you sort of approached, is that why you've gone for more of an adult kind of target audience?
Yeah, I think so. I think adults are funnier than kids in terms of internal state. Kids have a lot more freedom. They don't have as much baggage. So they they're not as weighed down by the internal state most of the time. Obviously, some kids can be. And then I find just observing myself and the people around me, I find adults do some really funny shit when you break it down. Like if you were like, there's a guy on Instagram who had like, it's the old thing where he's trying to explain human life to an alien. And if you actually do that mental exercise, we do some really nutty things in life that seem completely normal to us. But it's kind of madness. And particularly when you incorporate the internal state and all the stuff going on, all the stuff that your ego will try and do. So yeah, it's kind of funny. And like one of the characters, I'll quickly explain the 5 characters that we split up in the mind, the 5 main characters. Ego obviously runs the show. So ego's trying to, and ego is not a bad thing. You see sometimes like people talking about ego like it's a bad thing. It's not. It's part of healthy development. But ego is just, it's, whilst it can be complex, it's also pretty simple and just wants to keep you looking good to everyone around you. Make sure you're not rejected from your society or your groups, and doing nothing that would threaten that status quo. So that's ego's job, and he's obviously, as an ego would be, kind of bombastic and pretty intense. Monkey, which is so monkeys really kind of developed from the Buddhist principle of the monkey mind. So I don't know if you meditate at all or have ever tried to meditate.
Yeah, definitely do sit down and think. I don't call it meditating, but it's just a quiet time to be with yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, there's so many different ways to meditate, but monkey is essentially the voice in your head that just doesn't shut up.
Oh,
it doesn't always have anything nice to say. Like it's often fairly negative. It'll be there the first thing when you wake up in the morning. It's that just internal chatter in your head. So that's literally a monkey in the head. So like when you're viewing in this character in three characters' heads, monkey, ego, Miggy, which is the lizard brain. It's the amygdala. Um, he's literally going to be a small lizard, which is he's going to be a bunch of fun. But then when flight or freeze comes up, he'll take on different aspects. Like he'll turn into a T Rex and just dominate the entire mind. So um, the to kind of encapsulate things like an amygdala hijack. I don't know if you an amygdala hijacks when your brain just kind of
runs on
like
overload.
goes, yeah, it kind of goes on overload. You get into a situation where you just don't know how to handle it, and you either fight, flight, or freeze, and like all of your logical thinking goes out the
Out the
window.
window.
So
Yep.
yeah,
Yep. So
and then the other two are memory, because I find human memory is hilarious, and people relate to their memory like whilst it has incredible capacity, like memory doesn't work like data.
no.
People act like their memories work like data, and it's like that's not how that works. Like, and often memory can just get things wrong
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah.
easily.
Yeah.
I mean, if
Memories
you've
are
ever talked
really.
to a sibling about something that's happened as a kid, and they're like, "That's not what I remember at all," and it's like,
Yeah.
"Shit, I thought I had that exactly right."
Yeah, memory is one of those things which most people try to rely on, but of course, it's only ever memory as filtered through your filters to what actually happened. It's
That's
not
right.
actually the fact or
Yeah,
truth. So, yeah, memory is
yeah.
a real
Your
interesting one.
version, your stories, yeah.
Yeah. Um,
And then the last character is Atman, which is the self, the kind of not quite the soul, but like that more spiritual self, the more authentic self. And Atman's from the kind of the Brahmin, Indian, Hindu kind of, and I think Buddhist as well. Traditions that had Atman as like uh, not quite your higher self, but the part of you that connects with your higher self.
oh, okay. So you've spent time, obviously you've pulled these characters from a lot of personal experience. So have you gone through
Yeah.
journeys? Have you travelled around the world to actually pull out some of these characters and develop them?
I did a lot of traveling, particularly through my 20s and early 30s. I've been to India, I've been to Nepal, uh, Casablanca, or Morocco, a few countries in Europe, like France and stuff. So yeah, I've been around a little bit. And yeah, I definitely, I've always found it interesting looking into different cultures and different spiritual ideals and different philosophical ideals and how people approach this complicated kind of mushy pink mess we've got in our head.
It is it's a big mushy mess. So is there, because you've delved onto something which has been around for centuries, people have always kind of wanted to understand or wanted to discuss the way they approach it. Do you have anything in mind when you're drawing on similarities to other stuff that's been produced to go, it's sort of a bit like this and a bit like this, or
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, the easiest way to explain it is it's like an adult version of Inside Out, but Inside Out dealt with the emotions, whereas this is dealing with, different constructs of the mind, so psychological and neurobiological, um, spiritual constructs. Because I think, and emotions, I think Inside Out is honestly one of the best films ever written. Like, I think it's incredible what they managed to do in a fun and entertaining film and the layers to that. Actually, one of my favorite scenes is where Joy knocks over facts and opinions and goes, "Oh, I always get these mixed up," and I laughed about that for days. It's just like I almost want that GIF so I can just put it on every Facebook post, but every political Facebook post. It's like,
yep.
is it a fact? That's not a
Uh,
fact. Um, but yeah, I thought that was brilliant. Obviously, I loved uh, more recently there's Big Mouth, which I think the guys there did a fantastic job. Um, there was Herman's Head, but yeah, it's been a difficult one. I mean, it's probably why I didn't really approach it live action. It's not an easy thing to do in live action. There was what was that show in the '90s where you're inside the kid's head? Malcolm in the Middle, I think it was. Was he internal dialoguing all the time? I think so.
I can't remember Malcolm in the Middle. That was one I sort of didn't watch.
Yeah, yeah, neither did I really. But yeah, I'd say the closest things to it, and then there's stuff like BoJack Horseman dealing with adulting and this idea of adulting and how we just assume that we're going to be good at it or we're supposed to be naturally good at it, but it's just a messy process.
Yep. Yeah.
So, I like what they did with BoJack Horseman there. So
Yep.
yeah, it kind of draws from a few different ideas. I think the idea of the internal state's always been a tricky one to get into story though.
Yep.
Um, so I think that's why it's taken so long to develop how these characters interact and stuff. And then in terms of like just execution and style, you've got things like Rick and Morty, the way they explore these different alien worlds, like that definitely can be a similar kind of idea. And probably one of the things I've seen them that's impressed me the most was Midnight Gospel on which was Pendleton Ward and Duncan Trussell that on Netflix, and I thought that was just fantastic because it didn't occur like they set out to do something just because they thought that's what the audience wanted. They just set out to make something for that was cool and interesting, and I think it's incredible.
Yeah, it's definitely got an attractive appeal because I started watching it just because it got recommended, and I'm like, okay, well, what exactly is it? And because it doesn't, it's so broad and it doesn't actually hammer anything at you. It just kind of runs its course. It's like a real enjoyable experience to sit down and go through whatever it takes you through. And I found it a really
Yeah,
weird experience to watch, that one.
yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
I probably wouldn't go as far as they went, but I loved it. I loved the series. I love that they did something so out there and so original as well. Like that's also a thing that can be a bit hard to do these days is come up with a truly original concept because there's so many stories in the world now.
Yeah, I think we're in an interesting time now, especially with animation, Western world coming into animation and being so approachable with animation that a lot of adults, like our sort of age, are like, well, we do want to watch animation that is targeted more for us because
Yeah,
kids animation is great fun. Everyone loves kids animation. Well, kids do
yeah, yeah,
anyway. But yeah, a lot of adults reflect back on their animation, go, I still want to have that feeling, but with stories that are more relatable.
and yeah, you can do very different stuff with animation that's not really available in live action or not available for a reasonable amount of money.
mm,
Yeah, so you can achieve very different and results with animation that yeah you couldn't do.
yep.
So,
Well, there we go. I'm glad we actually got to have this little bit of time together to actually talk about the projects that you're working on. Of course, this is all done in Queensland as well, so Queensland's an exciting place to be in at the moment.
yeah, yeah,
So, like anyone said, if you're interested in JM's production that he's getting going, or the story and want to keep in contact with, or just follow along with his production process, please check him out on LinkedIn. I'll have a link in my description below. Thank you so much for sharing where you're going, JM.
thanks, man. Thanks
Um,
for having me.
So until the next time where we chat up and catch up with someone else from inside the amazing animation world of industry, I'll say bye bye.